It's midnight.
Midnight. Okay.
I had to take an afternoon nap today.
Yeah.
This is the farthest out that we have gone so far, right?
Yeah.
In this
yeah,
series,
right.
certainly. Luca has joined. Mukesh has joined. Nice. So this should be a fun session with lots of discussions, I hope. We'll get started. It's about 11 o'clock. So in the interest of time, let's get going. So today is the first COVID talk. People have gotten tired of COVID somehow. So there's not enough going on, at least from where I am sitting, it appears to be. So an agent-based model of spread of a pandemic, and the talk will be given by Professor Amitava Datta from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Western Australia in Perth. He and I go back a long ways. We first met when we began college around this time, 41 years ago. So Amitava did his BSc in physics from Presidency College, Calcutta, MSc from IIT Kanpur, and MTech and PhD in computer science from IIT Madras. The MSc was in physics, so he's actually both a physicist and a computer scientist. He did postdoctoral work at the Max Planck Institute for Computer Science and University of Freiburg, both in Germany. He was an academic staff member at the University of New England. This is in Australia. Currently, he is a professor of computer science at the University of Western Australia. He was a visiting professor at Freiburg, Warsaw University of Life Sciences, and Southwest University in China. His research interests are highly interdisciplinary, including in theoretical computer science, computer networks, data mining and machine learning, agent-based modeling, bioinformatics, sociophysics, and quantum algorithms. His publications span journals in computer science, social science, biological sciences, and theoretical physics. He has also published his research in many international conference proceedings, mainly in computer science, which is, of course, the culture in computer science and hard engineering. He has co-authored a book on cancer genetics and therapeutics, published by Springer. Currently, he's writing a book on quantum algorithms to be published by Springer undergraduate texts in physics. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Amitava, and let's get going.
Thanks, Rajit, and for your kind introduction and invitation. I'm really a bit nervous about this because I'm not a physicist, but basically in this series, I have heard quite a few talks, and they are on very well-formed and well-done topics and spanning a lot of work. But this work is a bit of a different in the sense that it is very much work in progress. So what I'll report today is, you can say, a preliminary kind of stage of this work. And I should mention that this is joint work with Surajit and Professor Peter Winkelstein from University at Buffalo. So let's get going. And this is the broad outline of my talk. Most of the things in the beginning will be quite obvious for all of you. Why is it important to model the spread of a pandemic? And I'll briefly touch upon the most well-known line of modeling of a pandemic spread. And then I'll talk a little bit about agent-based modeling and more details of our model. And then I'll straight go on to the results that we have obtained until now, and also possible extensions that are possible that can be done with this modeling. So what is the importance of modeling? A pandemic, as we all know by now, is a sudden crisis that overwhelms health infrastructure of any country or any community. And it's hardly possible to be prepared for a pandemic in the sense that as it happens, all of a sudden, it spreads very fast. However, even short-term forward predictions can help us in preparing the infrastructure, for example, hospital beds or intensive care units and all that kind of facilities, health facilities. And depending on the spread, perhaps it can also help in implementing social distancing measures or um, what could be the public policies for containing the spread of the pandemic. So due to these reasons, it is quite important to model the spread of a pandemic. Now, what are the popular ways of modeling pandemic spread? The most popular way is the so-called compartmental models. These models have a long history from the 1920s. And mainly the core part of these models is so-called the SIR model, susceptible, infected, recovered. Now, what happens is the models assume that the population, the entire population perhaps, or at least a part of the population is susceptible to be infected. And from there, some of the population that are in the susceptible compartment, they may get infected. And among the infected population, some recover and some develop severity. For example, they need to be hospitalized or they may even die. So yeah, as you can see, the entire population is divided into three compartments. Actually, SIR models have many other variants and they have more compartments. And this is the basic model, and probabilities are associated with transitions between compartments. For example, what could be the probability of people from the susceptible compartment going into the infected and from there to recovered or severity, etc. So the way it is modeled is through coupled differential equations, often nonlinear. And these probabilities are the pre-parameters in the model. And the probabilities need to be adjusted incrementally to predict the spread. So you monitor how the pandemic is spreading, and then you can adjust the pre-parameters to model more accurately. Now, I'll not go into the mathematics of this because I am not a specialist, nor I want to go into the details, but I'll just show you a picture of what really, what are the predictions of this model. So here you can see the red curve, which is the susceptible population, and gradually the susceptible population decreases. And the blue curve is the recovered population. So more and more people, when they are infected, they they develop symptoms and then they eventually recover. So with time, the recovered population grows like this. And the green curve here is the infected population. Now, this is our interest because the infected compartment or infected population is the burden on the public health system. So as you can see, most of the time, the infected population grows and reaches a peak, and then it decays like this. Now, you may ask, why is then modeling is hard? Actually, modeling the spread of a pandemic is a very hard problem The problem is, even though we know the shape of this curve, we don't know when it is going to peak. We don't know what will be the peak stage of the population in the infected compartment. And also we don't know the width of this spread. That means how it is going to decay. So if we can predict all this ahead of time, then we'll be in a better place to tackle the public health problem. So that is the broad nature of the prediction. Now, there are limitations of compartmental models. It's by no means I'm criticizing them, but these are more or less well known, that the compartmental models can adjust the free parameters to accurately fit the spread of a pandemic when you have more and more data available to you. That means you can adjust the parameters when you know the past data or historical data, what has happened earlier during the spread of the pandemic. And also, these models quite often consider the rate of infection. That is not a very reliable data, in the sense that infection rates are mostly based on testing, and testing is quite often biased because people are tested usually when they have already developed symptoms. For example, for the COVID-19 pandemic, as far as I know, or we know, that perhaps only South Korea and to some extent Germany introduced random testing of the entire population. In all other places, the testing was quite obviously, because the testing infrastructure is under tremendous stress. So you can't just test a large number of people unless they have developed the symptoms. So in that sense, the spread of a pandemic is not very you can't really predict the spread by looking at the testing data, because or you cannot verify your model by looking at the testing data, because testing data is often unreliable or biased. So I'll go into what we do in terms of verifying our model later, a little bit later. But let me first explain the basics of agent-based modeling. Now, agent-based modeling is based on the abstraction of the spread of a pandemic in the real world. Compartmental models, they consider the entire population or the population in the different compartments as homogeneous. That means we don't know what is happening within those compartments. There is no interaction, and we know that pandemic spread due to interaction between people, and infected people infect other people, etc. Now, in agent-based modeling, um, basically the abstraction is that, or the abstraction we have used in our preliminary work is that people get infected usually from visiting public places. And we also know the initial spread of infection depends on an unknown number of seed population, that is initially infected people who may be traveling from other places and coming to a community, and then from them the infection spread. So unlike in compartmental models, these interactions can be captured in agent-based models. So agents are like avatars who are computer avatars who meet each other, who may go to a public place. And if the public place has some load of infection or viral load, then they get infected, come back to their home, etc. So in that sense, the agent-based models capture this people-to-people interaction in a more accurate way, if you like, compared to the compartmental models. And also another criticism of the compartmental models that I mentioned already, that it is unrealistic to assume that each member of a population will act in a uniform way. In other words, the nuances of individual idiosyncrasies or whatever, how people behave in real life, are hard to capture in compartmental models. Now, agent-based modeling is not new in this area. For example, Epstein and Parker and Epstein did global scale agent-based modeling during the SARS pandemic. Their aim was much larger compared to ours. Our aim is to model this in smaller communities, in cities or regional areas, etc. But they built a model for 6 billion people for the entire world in a hierarchical fashion. And also, National Institute of Health's Models of Infectious Disease Agent Study, or MIDAS, they modeled the H5N1 pandemic using agent-based modeling. Again, that model was countrywide. That was a much larger scale model. Now, our aim was to use agent-based simulation for studying spread of a pandemic in local communities. And as I have mentioned already, that we have a belief that the data on infection is not so reliable due to the biased nature of testing. So we wanted to validate the model with robust government data. And we thought that the data on hospitalization and intensive care unit, these are the most reliable kind of data, because that's what is happening on the ground compared to testing data. We didn't directly use death data, as even the data of death is problematic for various reasons. For example, comorbidity and also accurate reporting, because people may go back home and they may die for other reasons, or for COVID, or for another pandemic. But we generally validated our death rates overall, but we didn't directly use the data, as you will see soon. So here is our model. There are two abstract places in our model at right now: home groups and public places. Now, as you know, discrete event simulation works in discrete time steps. So an agent is randomly picked from a home group to visit a public place at each simulation time step, provided there is space in the public place. We have a cluster of public places where each one has a fixed capacity. So if there is some space in the public place, an agent can visit the public place. Otherwise, that particular time step is considered as whatever, ineffective. Now, an agent visiting a public place stays there for some time and may get infected depending on the viral load that is already there in the public place, and also due to the presence of other infected agents in the public place. And after staying in the public place for a certain duration, the agent visiting a public place returns to its home group. And the home groups we have chosen are of size 2 to 6. So when we simulate a particular community, for example, let us say New York City, which has a population of 8 million people, we appropriately choose the number of home groups. And even though the membership of a home group is chosen randomly between 2 to 6, but we fix the total population in a way by choosing the number of home groups in the entire community. I'll elaborate a bit later on more subtleties of the model. So this is the overall structure of our model. Now, in our model, there are 4 kinds of agents. As the simulation progresses, Initially, there is a seed population of infected agents, which is usually very, very small. For example, most of our simulations, we have used 0.01% of the population as the seed. And then you can see this graph shows it. I'll go through it a bit more carefully. For example, this purple graph is the what we call as category 1 agent. What happens to them is they, even though they get infected, they are asymptomatic and they reach a certain level and their viral load plateaus, and then they recover in an exponential decay of the viral load. And they go back to the population as we don't assume any kind of immunity. So an agent of category 1 may recover, get infected, recover, and then again get infected. So we don't discriminate between immune and normal agents in that sense. Now, from here, some of the category 1 agents who have got infection, they develop further and further, their viral load grows and they reach a certain point where they need hospitalization. That means their infection level or viral load profile has reached a stage where they have developed severity. And then again, they reach a plateau, and some of them eventually again recover through an exponential decay of their viral load. And from among them, a certain population becomes category 4. That is, they further develops more complications and they have to be admitted to intensive care units, and then they recover from there. And the blue curve here is the curve for the agents who progress, their viral loads increase further and further, and they progress towards death, and eventually they die. Now, this profile is for randomly chosen agents. For example, these plateau regions are also stochastic in our model. It's not fixed for all the agents. It can vary between, let's say, 6 to 10 days. And this particular agent has, for example, a shorter plateau region. Similarly, this one is also, it varies. So these are just some particular agents chosen randomly from the entire population. Now, so what I'll show you in the next, after some slides, the results of our simulation will mainly concentrate on category 2 agents who are hospitalized and category 3 and 4 agents who require intensive care unit facilities. Category 1 agents, we don't track them due to the reason I mentioned earlier, because we don't know, we don't have very reliable data on testing. So these are the simulation details. Once infected, the viral loads of agents increase in each time step when an agent is in its home group. So they may go to a public place, come back, and their viral loads continue to increase. The length of the simulation we have fixed for 50 days, where an abstraction of a day is according to the population of agents. So what does that mean? Now, the overall goal during the simulation is to give an agent from each home group the possibility of visiting a public place 4 times within 50 days. And which is kind of realistic because they have to get groceries or food items from the public places. However, this is not guaranteed in the sense that this is stochastic, because when a particular member is chosen at each simulation time step, we don't know from which home group that particular member will be chosen. So it is quite possible that sometimes some of the home groups will be overrepresented in terms of visiting public place, and some will be underrepresented. Now, the concept of a day is a varying concept in the sense that depending on the population, size of the population, for example, for New York City, where the population is 8 million, a day is 136,000 simulation time steps. As you can see, for a larger population, we have to uh, make provision for the members of home groups to visit public places more. Whereas for a population of 1.8 million, a day is 36,000 time steps. So our days or our simulation is completely calibrated in terms of the total population that we are simulating. And the viral load profile also calibrated in terms of days. For example, category 2 agents develop the viral load before they are hospitalized for 6 days. And then the plateau region, as I said, it's variable between 6 to 10 days, etc. Now, our aims are twofold: to see how and whether an agent-based model can be used for the forward prediction of the spread of a pandemic. Also, we wanted to validate our model against robust and reliable data. I have spoken about this a few times. So we validated our model against the hospitalization and ICU admission data in New York State, which is available from New York government portal and updated daily, even now. So these are the free parameters in our model. As you can expect, just like compartmental models, any model has to have some free parameters that we need to tune to make the predictions fit the data in some sense. So for example, there is a probability for transition from category 1 to category 2. And as we know, category 2 means those agents require hospitalization. There is a probability of transition from category 2 to 3 and 4. That means the agents who are admitted to intensive care units. This is not very important for our results because we don't really use the death data, but in our simulation, we use a transition from category 3 to 4 because, as I mentioned, category 4 agents eventually recovered from after they are admitted to intensive care units. And this is also a free parameter, though we have never varied this. The seed population, initial seeding of infected agents, we have taken 0.01% of the population as the seed in all our simulations. Now, as you can see, this table is divided into two parts. There is a gap here. The reason for that is these are very sensitive parameters for our simulation. If you vary any of these probabilities a little bit, then your results tend to vary quite significantly. The reason is not very unintuitive, because if you change the probability from transition from category 1 to 2, then of course more agents, if you increase this probability, then more agents will require hospitalization, and that will trigger more agents entering intensive care units, etc. So these are sensitive parameters. The parameters here are not so sensitive. That means they are quite, varying them really doesn't affect the results so much. For example, capacity of public places. The total capacity has an effect on the simulation results, as we'll see quite soon. Then there are other parameters like viral load threshold, where category 1 agents go into category 2 and category 2 to category 4, etc. Those are also quite robust parameters in the sense that changing them, there is not much effect on the eventual results. Similarly, the plateau regions. I'll show you some results for this kind of parameters later. So this is a boring bit, how we simulated. We wrote the program in ANSYS using the shared memory OpenMP library. As you can imagine, these are very intensive simulations and they take a huge amount of time. So all simulations were run on a single node of two Cray supercomputers with 28 and 24 physical cores, respectively. And for people who care, we did not use hyperthreading because it was not good for our parallelization. So to give you an estimate, the simulation for a population of 8 million took about 42 hours. Uh, it is so intensive, even with parallelization and 28 physical cores. And a population of 1.8 million took about 6 hours, each of the simulations. And during the simulation, we keep track of only infected agents and see what they are doing, what is their activity. That way, we could make the simulation a bit more efficient, or I should say, quite more efficient. Okay, so I'll from here on, I'll show you mainly results, and this table is the table for the parameters, the sensitive parameters, and also the public place that we have used in our simulation. For New York City, we took this transition probability from category 1 to category 2 as only 0.2. That means only 20% of the infected population eventually require, they transition to category 2 and require hospitalization. And this one is among those 20%, about 30% of that 20%, they require ICU. And then this, as I said, is not very important for us. Now, you notice one of the things here it is important to notice is that here the probability from category 1 to 2 is 0.2, but for Western New York, which is more of a regional area spread out over a large geographic area, that transition probability we took much, much less. And this has something to do with the dynamics or demography or the way people behave in a large city and the way people behave in a smaller community or rural community. Because in a large city, you would expect that the rate of infection is much higher or the spread of infection is much higher. The interesting thing is we also simulated for mid-Hudson Valley, which is a region north of New York City and quite close to New York City. Perhaps the people there use the public transport or all other facilities of the New York City uh, much more than people in Western New York. And we noticed that our simulation parameters for New York City and Mid-Hudson are identical to get the fit with the actual hospitalization and ICU data. Similarly, public place capacity also, we took 10% of the entire population as the public place capacity for New York City and also for Mid-Hudson. Whereas for Western New York, we took only 1% of the entire population as the public place capacity to match the actual government data. And this is again intuitive because large cities have much more capacity for public place. And as we know from the spread that we have noticed that the spread of pandemic was much higher in both of these regions. So from here on, let's have a look at some of the results. Now, this slide shows that for the Western New York region, this is the government data, where the meaning of this graph is that the yellow or golden bars here are the data for ICU admission. And the blue part superimposed on this is the data for hospitalization, but patients who didn't require ICU facilities. So here is the government data, and here is our simulation data. I'll show you more clearly the comparison between the two. But what is more noticeable is that, and what I should emphasize here, that we don't incrementally adjust our parameters. Once we fix the parameters that I have shown you in the previous slide, we stick with it, and this is what we get at the end of the simulation, which is quite comparable to the data that we have seen from the government portal. To give you a better comparison, here is the comparison between Western New York hospitalization data. The blue curve is the government data for hospitalization, and the red curve is the data from our simulation. Even though it looks quite different, actually the difference, even at these points, is about 30 or 40 in terms of the individual patients who were hospitalized. Similarly here, this is the ICU comparison, where the blue curve is New York state government data and the red one is our simulated data. Again, the difference is very small, about 10 to 15 individuals, if you compare. Now, we have taken only a truncated part of the government data because up to 50 days from the start of the pandemic, because our simulation is only for 50 days. Now, here is the data for New York City, which has a population of 8 million. This is the government data. Again, the meaning is same. This yellow one is ICU, and the blue bars are non-ICU. And this is our simulation data. And again, the thing to notice here is the population is much higher compared to Western New York. So if you want to see a direct comparison, here it is. The red curve is simulated data, and the blue curve is the government data. Now, even though it looks very close, but here the differences sometimes are in hundreds, because as you can see this scale, the numbers are much higher. Still, the match between the government data and simulated data is quite close. Now, here is the ICU data. Now, this is not very impressive, perhaps, because for us, the government data and ICU data is differing much. One of the things that we had a handicap is what I have mentioned earlier, that a single run for New York City took 42 hours of supercomputer time. So as you can notice, as I have mentioned to you, that those sensitive parameters, unless we tune quite accurately, we get quite significantly varying results in the simulation. So we couldn't tune the New York City parameters very much due to the very long simulation time. But with more computing resources, it can be done quite easily. Now, this is Mid-Hudson Valley, and you can see the trend here is very similar to New York City. And most probably that is due to the proximity of Mid-Hudson Valley, proximity to all the public place facilities, public transportation, subway, etc. of New York City. And this is our simulation data, which is quite a good match. And here are the comparisons. Again, you can see here, even though Mid-Hudson Valley, the spread of the pandemic was quite severe in terms of thousands, but these gaps are usually not more than about 100 or so. So the match between the government and simulation data was quite good. And this is the comparison of ICU admission. Blue is simulated and red is government data. Now, here are some tests for the insensitive parameters. For example, in this curve here, what I have done is I have simply doubled the plateau regions. And as you may expect that if you double the plateau regions, people are taking more time to recover from hospitalization, from ICU, etc. And here I have just increased the viral load thresholds. So the result of that is earlier people were hospitalized after 6 days. Now they are hospitalized after 12 days and so on. So net result of all this is the shifting of the curves. That is, earlier the curve was rising faster from here, and now the curve is rising later. So that shows that those parameters are not very sensitive in terms of the simulations. Okay, so how can you model social distancing with this agent-based modeling? Well, here is a result of social distancing. What I did was I imposed a complete lockdown between days 8 to 16. So a complete lockdown in our simulated universe means that no agent is picked to visit any public place during those days, between days 8 and 16. And you can see the lockdown started here and ended here, but the result is reflected later in this part, where both the hospitalization and ICU admission are close to zero. So that can be done, but of course we know that a complete lockdown is quite often infeasible. So you can also test other kind of social distancing, for example, reducing public place capacity. Now, these results are perhaps will not be very convincing for you. As I have mentioned earlier, that public place capacity is a kind of robust parameter in our model. If you vary it to some extent, the difference in results are not that significant. So still, you can see some benefit of this modeling that this is for Western New York, and the blue curve is when the public place capacity is only 1% of the population, and the red curve is when the capacity is 40% of the population. And more or less, you can see a dip in a slight, albeit, but a dip in the hospitalization and a dip in the ICU. That means if you consider the constraining the capacity of public places as a social distancing measure, one can study what is the effect of that on hospitalization and also on ICU admission. Okay, so we just now before the talk we are discussing, Surajit and I, that this model can be enhanced. Right now, the limitation of the model is that we don't have any geographic information on the model. The home groups are in an abstract space, and also the public places are in an abstract space. An agent can visit any public place randomly. But what one can do is, and I have already done some work, though I can't show you any results at this point, that we can impose a spatial grid on home groups. That means we can really make it like a community or like a city where there are different places and different public places. So in other words, to put it simply, we can have coordinates associated with home groups and also public places. Now that will enable us to study selective social distancing measures. We can also impose other demographic data, for example, the ages of home group members, or the different other kind of information, whatever you like. And it is also possible to have moving public places like the New York subway, for example, where a public place will start from a particular geographic location, and according to simulation steps, we have time. Our time is according to simulation steps, and the public place can go to another geographic location, and the agents can get off the public transportation and so on. And also the model could be useful for other studies in social sciences, which we are thinking about, but right now uh, we haven't done much in that direction. So thank you. I'll stop here, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for a great talk. Let's open the floor up to questions. So right now, everybody is muted. You might want to unmute yourself and ask questions.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, you want to go ahead.
While you're doing the simulation, is there a way, I mean, the parameters that you chose were arbitrary at some level. You got some reasonable values, but they're not, they may not be right. So while the simulation is proceeding, can you, I mean, rather than run the simulation completely, okay, while it's proceeding, can you update the parameters?
Absolutely. That can be done. That definitely can be done. Actually, we thought that let's see what kind of forward prediction this model can give. So we didn't want to tune the parameters during the simulation, but absolutely it can be done. For example, these probabilities can be changed mid simulation. There is no difficulty in there.
Okay.
So that is quite possible.
Okay, thank you.
One of the comments I can make, Geminu, is that the numbers that we chose for the P's, the effective viral load, these numbers, yes, they are arbitrary, but they're sort of driven by the data. So for example, we know what's the proportion of people who are ending up in the hospitals.
Right.
So Peter is a pediatrician and one of the health informatics executives in the community. So he has been able to bless us with some of this data. So some of these numbers that you see are directly taken from from Peter's suggestions. Yes,
but we did have a lot of difficulty in estimating public place.
Who
knows?
Yeah.
Who knows how many grocery stores in New York City are? So that this column is you can say quite arbitrary in that sense. If we can get a better estimate of this column, that will be very, very valuable. But that's not easy.
Yeah. So Shomnath is asking a question. I came a bit late. Very sorry. What are the carry home points with respect to India?
I think it can be used. I mean, again, our validation is only with respect to hospitalization and ICU. As far as I know, I haven't seen. I definitely have seen hospitalization data, but I haven't seen that distinction in Indian data. Most probably, what happens in ICU, I think Surajit knows better. I think more of oxygen and that kind of facilities which are needed, perhaps. So if we have more accurate data, then perhaps we can use this model as well. The another problem with this perhaps simulating the Indian scenario is that we don't know that clearly the population of a community, or where the community start and where they end. For example, Mumbai city, New York City, more or less, we know, okay, 8 million, maybe it could be 8.5 million. But Mumbai, who knows the actual population, or what is the extent, the geographic extent. So those kind of things could be problematic for using this model?
Yeah, I mean, India has pretty good data, but the data may not have the granularity needed along with the
Yeah,
uh, city or town details. If you're looking at a smaller area, for example, a rural district, I think it'll be relatively
that will
easy
be
to
more
do it
accurate.
as long as we know the seeding. But if
Yeah,
you're doing a big city, because city populations are of the order of 15 to 20, 25 million, uh, you're talking about unrealistic simulation times if you want to do the whole city. So I'd imagine that
yeah,
if you do a small part of the city, more localized areas, and then bunch them together for a significant part of the city, that's a possibility. Uh, but in the Indian context, the main carry home message is India has been pretty good about imposing serious lockdowns periodically. And one
yeah,
of the things that you see here is that periodic lockdowns then knock off the total numbers significantly. So therefore,
yeah,
the spread's been controlled by these periodic lockdowns. That hasn't been done so much in the US, but in the Indian context, I think that has been done. And our model actually shows that. The other comment that I'd like to make, which Amitava already alluded to, is that the seeding is very important because the seeding is a sensitive variable. So one of the things that you see going on in the US now is there's this enormous spread, right? And one
yeah,
reason is
that's
that we
correct.
didn't get rid of the virus, right? We didn't really do lockdowns. So our current pandemic condition is wildly dependent upon the seeding, and the seeding now is enormous here because we haven't done a lockdown. So you actually see uh, that thing really coming out straight off from these simulations, which is kind of exciting actually. Sad, but it's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you, Amitava. Thank you, Sujit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You have to unmute yourself because I think everybody is muted right now. Okay. Let me just make a comment because one of the things that uh, we know is that various communities have been affected in unique ways by COVID, right? For example, many of the poorer African American communities in various American cities have been rather severely affected. Their family structures are such that many have large families. And in those large families, there are people who are younger and people who are quite old. Each of them have different susceptibilities to the disease. So one one thing that we're currently trying to look at, uh, and we're at the very early stages, is actually go to community level detail and build that into the model, because that's something
yeah.
you can actually now do, and that can inform to some degree the public policy that that one would expect, uh, to be promulgated, such that there might be some effect. So this can be a direct outcome of the model. Uh, we have submitted our paper, so we'll see what happens to it. It's already been rejected twice without review when Abhida was submitted. So that's the condition. People see something being done on COVID and they immediately throw it away, uh, which is kind of sad. But uh, there are things you can do with this kind of an approach. Uh, if there is data, then it can be quite exciting. You might actually be able to, from a predictive standpoint, might be able to do quite a bit. And there is not
And
that much we saw in the
yeah.
literature.
And also, if people who are interested in computer science listening, I would say that this is a lot of fun. I mean, in terms of um, tracking the agents. In fact, just for the sake of it, I have done a lot of things which I didn't report here. Just for the fun, I mean, what the agents are doing and which agent has visited public place how many times. So it's a lot of fun. Agent-based simulation is fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and oftentimes I mean, for example, in a model like this, one can imagine putting in a genetic algorithm component to it. For example, that can help you optimize the numbers, right? By trying out various possibilities on how to have an ideal scenario. So you can base your policy with the backbone of this model along with a genetic algorithm put on top of it to see what might be the best ways to develop policy for going forward. Uh, yeah, UB does have supercomputers. These simulations were done in Perth, however. So Mike is asking a question. Love the computer science simulations. UB has supercomputer, right? There was another
Yeah.
question which came. Sorry, go ahead.
Again, I would say a few things about the simulation. Actually, I tried out both the distributed memory model through message passing because I have a big supercomputer that I could use. But the problem is the simulation has some constraints that message passing doesn't make it much efficient. So basically, a lot of data needs to be sent back and forth to keep track of the statistics. So eventually, I dropped the idea of distributed memory simulation. Instead, I concentrated on shared memory and used 28 cores and 24 cores. So that seemed to be more efficient. So yeah, we thought of using the supercomputer in UB at some point, but I think it has lots of restrictions that Surajit has to be logged in when I log in.
Yeah, this is
So
all security, right? Universities have become very security conscious. There was another question that was asked by Mike. Uh, avoided single-member households. So the question was, what about single-member households? Because we took home groups of 2 to 6 and not 1 to 6.
yeah, as such, single-member households, they are not a problem, but I think that brings in the question of demographics and things like that. So, and also maybe more fine tuning of the simulations. For example, if there is a single member household and the member doesn't get a chance to visit a public place, what happens to them? So that sort of question. So from the simulation point of view, I don't think it's a big problem, um, but we really need to extend the model to bring in those kind of factors in future.
Yeah. Some areas have, for example, this area has nearly 30% single member households. So it can be a significant factor in spreading as well, because
Yeah.
it's the same person who is going out again and again, right? So if the accounting is not done with that level of detail, which we have not, then that effect won't come in. So that said, single member households could have had some effect here that
Yep.
we may have missed. That's a very good question, actually. And Professor Mahanti asked the question of viral load. How do you define viral load?
Well, the viral load is calibrated in terms of our simulation time.
No, how do you define the viral load? So what is it basically? Right?
well, I think it is known that basically people who are affected severely, they do have a higher viral load in the sense that the quantity or number of virus in their system is definitely higher. So that is the abstraction we have used. But and also we have calibrated the viral load in terms of how many days the load grows. So eventually that's the measure of viral load in our model, that after how many days someone starts recovering, people who are asymptomatic, or after how many days people are hospitalized, and that sort of thing. So yeah, we don't have more precise definition of viral load, I guess.
Well, we have the body's defense also, right?
Yeah,
If
it's
that gets
like
there.
it's a severity given person, how
Yeah.
severe the virus is, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Actually,
yeah, more vitamin D,
there
your
is,
viral load might go down.
yeah, and also it may vary from individuals, because some people may be able to, their system may be able to handle a much higher load compared to someone else. So yes, in that part of our model, there is no stochasticity. So all category 2 agents who are eventually hospitalized, they get hospitalized after 6 days after they get first infected. So there could be a stochasticity there as well, but
But
we don't have that right now.
but
You
I think
introduce vaccine to the system, your model?
I don't know. We haven't thought about it.
you mean if you start to
Actually,
vaccinate?
introducing vaccine will be equivalent to considering immunity. We dropped the idea of immunity because if you notice that the expert opinion on immunity is not very consistent. I
Yes.
mean, so whether people really develop even some short-term immunity, no one knows really. So
What we can do is if there is a vaccine effect that we want to introduce, we can change the population as a lower it as a function of time. That might mimic effectively, because if somebody is vaccinated and somebody cannot get it, that person is equivalent to not being in the population, right?
Effectively.
So in a first order approximation, we can keep reducing the population. So it'll actually capture the effect to some degree.
Actually, there's an interesting news article. I think I saw it yesterday or today, which said that the most popular people are the ones that are probably lead to much more infection than the normal people. Yeah, because they're the ones who meet friends and they're the ones who go to bars and
yep.
meet friends. So yes, the suggestion was if you get like a vaccine, the first people who should be vaccinated are the popular people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, there was an article in New York Times a couple of days ago.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I
There
think.
is a study that people who frequent restaurants, for example, they are the hubs of spread of COVID.
Right.
I mean, or eateries of any kind, they go and eat there. So definitely, that's quite intuitive.
Yeah. Shobnath is asking a question, because of supercomputing non-availability, can one use Google Colab Python facility for any reliable study?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, which I didn't have time or I didn't try is to write this simulation in GPUs, the graphics processing units, which may improve. I have some ideas how to do it, but I didn't have the energy. So Google Colab, of course, Google Colab gives you quite a decent GPU for free.
Mm-hmm.
And the data, I haven't measured the memory requirement of this because I had almost 128 gig of RAM for my simulation. One problem in GPU could be that GPU has only I think the Google Colab GPU that you get for free has only 6 gig. So if you are simulating a population of 8 million, for example, that's not enough.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I think if you pay, then you can get much better GPUs. Yes, I think making it a GPU enable code will help in speeding
Yeah.
up the simulations, which I am tired of doing.
Thank you. Yes.
It's quite a bit of work. Any other questions? If not, we'll We'll thank Amitava and close.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
a
you, Amitava.
fantastic talk.
Thank you, Sujit. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, next one is December 5th. So just so that you remember. And that will be on granular stuff. Xiaoping from Paris will be speaking. Xiaoping Jia. Experiment. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.